Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Camu and welcome to another video. Today I want to show you which cards are the best to craft when it comes to Legendary, because the patch is out now and a lot of you guys just milled a lot of cards and you have a lot of scraps left, and already some of you told me that they don't know which cards they should craft, and that's why I thought I would make a short guide on what I think are the best cards to craft. And so let's start with the neutral. What many players in the on the top leaderboard play right now is Renew. This is a card which resurrects a golden unit from either graveyard, which means that basically every golden unit that's in your graveyard and that you played and your opponent played, you can resurrect in further rounds. And people use that, for example, right now to resurrect Succubus, or maybe a wild boar of the sea, but you have a lot of options, and so this versatility makes this card really good and a viable option for decks of all sorts in the top of the leaderboard. So if you don't know what to craft, I think this is a card that we will see in the future, and it will be included in many decks. So this is a good neutral card to craft. The second card that I would suggest is Geralt Igni. I think this card is decent. It's very situational, but when it hits hard. And we saw already in closed beta many decks that played Geralt Igni, and I think we will see Geralt Igni for the foreseeable future, and I think this is really a decent card to craft. What it does, actually, as I said, it destroys all the highest units on the opposing row if that row totals 20 stats or more power, which means that if your opponent has, for example, a minion with 20 stats on one row, then you just destroy it. Or if he has, for example, 2 minions with 20 stats, then you both destroy it. And that makes him really good in many situations, and I see it all the time in the top of the ladder. So if you don't know what to craft, I think this is a decent card. Also, what might be more debatable in the neutrals are first the Avallach. The Avallach is a card which, when you deploy it, if neither player has passed, both players draw the top 2 cards from their deck. Which means that usually this card has not enough stats to be good as a golden card, but in combination with decks that are very well suited for longer rounds, for example, the Skellige X-Men deck, or the Monster Consume deck, anything that's exponential in growth is really good with Avallach. Also, there are some types that are mill types which try to remove all the cards of your opponent's deck so that he doesn't draw any anymore. This card is used as well, so I see it all the time. This is the third card that I would suggest in the neutral spot. What we could also, as a fourth card, craft is Regis. And what Regis, the higher vampire, does is, if you deploy it, look at 3 random bronzer units from your opponent's deck, consume one, and shuffle the others back. Which means that this is a consume card. And the reason I would suggest it is because it's really good in Monster Consume. And Monster Consume in this patch seems like a really strong deck. And so if you want to play monsters, this is probably a card you want to craft. If you don't want to play monsters, or you don't have monster cards, you should not craft it at all. And you should just wait until you get more cards for monsters, because this card will only be played in monsters. So now that we talk about monsters, let's look at the monster golden legendaries. And what I definitely would suggest is the first thing to craft for monsters, if you want to play monsters, is Guilds. He is played in every monster deck. Every monster deck that you see on the ladder. Because what it does is, if you deploy it, then it draws the top golden card and the top silver card from your deck. and you play one and return the other to the top of your deck, which means that you have 2 cards, a golden and a silver card, and you can decide which one you want to play. And if you, for example, play the silver card, which for example might be a crone, then you place the golden card at the top of your deck, which means that your next draw is incredibly strong. So this card is not only a golden card by itself, or plays a golden card plus 2 stats, but it also improves the draws that you make. And even though he's a little bit situational and a little bit random, he is still an auto-include in all monster decks. So this is the first card that I would craft for monsters, because this is just a powerhouse. The second one is, it really depends on which archetypes you play, but if you are at the beginner stage, then I would suggest Caretaker, because Caretaker is suitable for weather decks, and it's suitable for consume decks, and it's slightly above average. And the only reason why some people don't play him is because there are a lot of good situational legendaries out there. For example, the Woodland Spirit or the Succubus, which are played in certain environments of the meta but are worse in other spots. So if you, for example, play a lot of weather, then Woodland Spirit might be better than Caretaker. But if you're in the beginner stage and you don't know which type of deck you want to play, I think Caretaker is the card to craft. It is always decent, and you can include it in any deck, and it does always do well. So these are the 2 cards that I would always craft when I would play monster at the beginner stage. When it comes to the different types, I think the best 3 left cards are, if you play weather monster, is first of all the Woodland Spirit. This card is just insane. It spawns 3 rapid wolves, which are of 1 stat, and fog. It applies 1 fog to 1 opposing row. So that means that you also summon foglets, and it has 5 stats by himself. So this is, if you play weather monster, this has to be in your deck. This is the first card to craft if you want to play weather monsters together with guilds. Also, if you want to play weather monsters, you have to include Caranthir. That's just also a powerhouse, because if you deploy him, then he moves 5 enemies to this unit's row on your opponent's side and apply frost to that row on that side only, which means that usually you end up with all your enemies' units on 1 row and applying biting frost to that, doing a ton of damage. So if you play weather monsters, I would suggest crafting guilds, Woodland Spirit, and Caranthir first. And if you don't know what to craft or what to play, then you should play the Caretaker. The last card that's important is the Succubus. And the Succubus, it's a very situational card. And if played on your opponent's side, then after 2 turns at the start of your turn, move the highest other unit on its row to your side. And I personally would not suggest to craft it unless you are already at the highest ranks, because I think right now there are some decks and some high level decks and high rank decks that play Succubus, but I think it's extremely situational, and the only reason why Succubus is played is because of the Skellige bears and the X-Men decks. And that is the only reason why people like, for example, Life Coach or myself are playing this card. And so that's why I wouldn't suggest to craft it at all, actually, unless you are, as I said, at the highest ranks, because this card is too situational, and there might be a time in 1 week where this card is just not used at all anymore. Okay, so let's go to Nilfgaard. When it comes to Nilfgaard, I think the best golden card to craft is Cahir. If you deploy him, then this card triggers your leader's deploy ability, which means that you can combine him with Calvate, and then this card can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and play 1, which means that he is extremely versatile and he has 4 stats. And so even if he was nerfed from 5 to 4, I think this is still the best golden card of Nilfgaard, and add it in any archetype that you play. Also, when it comes to Nilfgaard, the second card that you should craft, I think it's not quite clear, because I think Rainfarn is a break-even card right now. It was nerfed from 6 to 4. It was OP at 6. Now I think it's break-even. I think you can include this card in your deck, and it's definitely good. But you can always consider to add something else in there, for example, neutral cards. But I would definitely consider to craft this guy. Also, a very good card right now is Letho. What he does is that you can play him as a spy, and then he has only 1 stat. And what he does is he absorbs the strength of adjacent units, and then he gets it, he boosts himself, which means that you can play, for example, a D-bomb and all the stats get removed. So this is a combo, like you play Letho, you absorb all the strength, and then you play the D-bomb and you remove the strength. But the reason why this card is good right now is because of Scalliger, because you can banish Morkvak and you can banish the bears, which makes this card incredibly good against Scalliger. But this card is situational, because it's not so good against anything else but Scalliger. And I think if you play a lot against Scalliger and against the Morkvak and the Savage Bear, I think this is a card you could craft in a spy archetype. But it's pretty close. I think this would be the second card I would craft now. And the third one would be probably the Rainfarn. And the fourth one would probably be the Menno. And what Menno does is he destroys all spying enemies, which means that he's 8 by himself, but he, in round 1, usually is around 20 stats, which makes him like break even. Maybe a little bit worse, but this card can only be played in a spying archetype, which means that this card is of lower priority when it comes to crafting. So I don't think that Tibor Ekbrecht is good anymore. I think he can only be played in a mill archetype, plus he is a little bit worse than break even, so I wouldn't craft him. Same applies to Vilgefortz. Since the closed beta is over and the Roach got nerfed, I think this card is not viable anymore, unless you play a milk archetype. Let's go to Northern Realms. When it comes to Northern Realms, I think the first card you should always craft is Shani. If you deploy her, she resurrects a unit and adds 3 armor to it. And that's just very, very good. And I think she's the best golden card in Northern Realms, and if you want to play Northern Realms, she's the first card you want to craft. The second one is Phillipa Eilhart. Phillipa Eilhart, if you deploy her, she damages an enemy by 5, then a random enemy by 4, 3, 2, and 1. Which means that she is basically 16 stats if you get her off. And these 15 stats on your opponent board are actually more important than stats by herself, because damaging is always better. Even though she might be situational and you don't get all the stats out there or all the damage, I think she's the second best gold card in Northern Realms. And if you have enough scraps and you want to play Northern Realms, just craft her and you're fine. The third one is Bloody Baron. But this, again, this is a card that's really situational. And when it comes to the recent patch, I've seen only decks of Northern Realms which play Bloody Baron, but they seem like cheesy decks. They seem like, if you know what they're doing, you are pretty much set up to win. And if you don't, then this Bloody Baron will just destroy you, probably. Because what he does is you always draw him into turn 3 and turn 2. And while he is in your deck, he gets boosted for any minion that is destroyed, for any enemy minion that is destroyed. Which means that there are archetypes that just destroy the opponent's board, and on round 3, they will draw the Bloody Baron, and it will be like 30 stats or maybe 25 stats, which is pretty strong. But I think this card only suits one archetype of deck, and it's very situational. If you are at the highest strengths, you might test them out and play him maybe. If you are at the lowest ranks, I think you shouldn't craft him yet, and you should play neutral cards instead. So let's now come to Scoia'Tael. When it comes to Scoia'Tael, I think the best card is Saskia. She is played in all decks. If you want to play Scoia'Tael, you should craft her first. What she does is when you play your leader, then this card is played from your deck, just for free. And I think this is really good. This is a better Roach, and I think she's OP and the best legendary of Scoia'Tael. So if you want to play Scoia'Tael, you don't have her, you should definitely craft her. The second best card I think is Ithlinne. If you deploy her, play a bronze special card from your deck, then spawn a copy of it and shuffle the others back. Which means that you can pick a bronze special card and you play it twice. Which means you play 2 bronze cards and you pay in 4 stats. And that's, even though she got nerfed from 2 to 4 stats, I think she is still really strong. I think she's the best, or the second best legendary card for Scoia'Tael. When it comes to the others, they are again situational and dependent on the archetype. But if you, for example, decide you want to play a move archetype, this is the card to craft, because if you deploy him, you move 3 units to this unit's row, and if they're allies, you strengthen them by 2, which means that he is 14 stats, and that's decent for a golden card. But you also move them, and you can move them out of weather, for example. So this card is very good if you play the move archetype or a dwarf archetype usually. So that would be the third card I would craft. But again, this is situational depending on the deck that you want to play. And the fourth card, I think that is overlooked because ambush seems to be not viable right now, is the Isengrim. I think you shouldn't craft them first. Probably you should try to craft neutral first and include them. But I definitely think we should keep an eye on this guy, because he plays a bronze or silver ambush card from your deck, and he's 7 stats, which means that he's a silver card plus 7 stats. That makes him extremely strong. But again, the ambush archetype is right now not viable, so it depends what happens in the next week. And I would wait to craft him, but again, just keep an eye out for him. Let's now go to the last fraction, which is Skellige. And I think the best Scalliger legendary card is Coral. If you deploy her, pick a unit and damage all units on its row by half their power, rounding down and ignoring armor. Which means she's very often a lot of stats, right? Like 20 stats. And very rarely she is only 5 or less. And I think she's the best golden card of Skellige, and we see her in all the decks. In all Skellige decks she's included, except for the one archetype with Avallach. But this card is just pure bonkers, and if you think about crafting a Skellige deck, this is the card, the legendary card to craft first. Also, a card that is very good is the Hjalmar. And if you deploy him, he spawns a Lord Andvik on the leftmost side of the opposite row, and this guy has 5 stats. But if you kill him, your Hjalmar gains 20 stats, which means that he is usually he gains 10 stats and goes to 25, which means that he is usually like 20 stats. Maybe 18, but probably 20 stats. And that makes him just insane. And he's probably on the same strength level as the Coral, and this should be definitely a card you include in your Scalliger decks. When it comes to the third craft, I think Madman Lugos, deploy, and you discard a bronze unit from your deck, and then you damage a unit by a discarded unit's base power, which means that you usually play with a Clan Crate Warrior, Clan Crate Raider, who, if you discard him, comes back to the first row and has around 5 stats. And that's extremely strong. So, but it's situational, and the Clan Crate Raider might end up damaging your mulligans, so this card is not on the same power level as Coral and Hjalmar, but this is a very, very good Scalliger card. And another very good card is the Wild Boar of the Sea, because every turn at the start of your turn, strengthen the unit to the left by 1 and damage the unit to the right by 1. And what it does, it improves the stats of your resurrection units. So if a unit dies, it keeps the stats and you resurrect it, so you gain the stats twice. Or for example, you can buff a Morkvak, which is also pretty good if it doesn't get stolen. So when it comes to Scalliger, definitely craft Coral, definitely craft Hjalmar, and then you can decide whether you put neutral cards in your deck or the Madman Lugos or the Wild Boar of the Sea. I want to mention though that there are some archetypes right now that play Cambi. This is a card that after 3 turns at the start of your turn, you spawn Heimdall, and Heimdall destroys all the units on the board which are non-golden. Which means that you play him on round 3 and you just destroy everything and give your opponent a Heimdall. But what it also do is you play Hjalmar first, because then you kill the Lord Andvik and you get a 25 statter. Which means that your opponent needs to have a very high golden card in order to win. And usually you can play Shekels, for example, or maybe he doesn't have a huge golden card. But this card is very situational and more like a fun type of Skellige. So I wouldn't craft him at all. But if you want to have fun, this is the card to go for. So here you have it. This is the guide, and I hope you know a little bit more about what you want to craft and in which cases, in which decks, which cases of decks you want to play, which cards you have to craft. And I hope you enjoyed the guide. Leave a like if you liked it, and if you want more content like this, tell me in the comments. And I wish you a great day, and goodbye.